Cowboy bathed in the wrong river. Apache chief. Whoever bathes in this water will marry my daughter. The midday sun hung high in the cloudless sky, beating down on the arid desert landscape. The heat shimmered off the dry earth as a lone cowboy, dust-covered and weary, rode along the riverbank. His horse, equally tired, trotted slowly, its hooves stirring up little clouds of sand with each step. For days, the cowboy had been traveling, crossing mountains and desert plains, with no company but the wind and the endless horizon. His name was Jake Walker, a man of few words, hardened by years of wandering the West. He wasn't one for towns or saloons, preferring the solitude of the open plains. His only goal was to escape the ghosts of his past, but the desert was unforgiving, offering no answers, only more questions. Jake had heard rumors of a mysterious river deep in Apache territory, a sacred waterway that could wash away all manner of troubles. Many said it had healing powers, though none who sought its waters ever returned to tell the tale. Intrigued by the legends, Jake decided to follow the river's course, hoping to find solace or perhaps a way to silence the ghosts haunting his every step. As he rode along the water's edge, the river seemed to call to him. The sound of the water flowing over smooth stones was a soothing melody, a stark contrast to the dry crackling of the desert. Jake urged his horse forward, the promise of fresh water more appealing than anything else. When he reached the river's edge, the sight of the crystal-clear water was too tempting to resist. The heat had made his clothes stick to his body, and he felt the sharp sting of sweat and dirt in his eyes. With a sigh of relief, he dismounted and knelt by the water, cupping his hands to drink. But just as his hands touched the surface, a voice boomed from behind him. "That water is sacred, cowboy." Jake spun around, startled. Standing on the opposite bank was an old man, his long gray hair braided down his back, and his clothes, fringed and adorned with beads marking him as a chief of the Apache people. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his presence commanding. A group of warriors stood behind him, silent and watchful, their eyes locked on Jake with wary caution. The chief's piercing gaze never left Jake. "You have bathed in the wrong river. Stranger," he continued, his voice steady and strong. "The waters here are not for the unworthy." Jake, caught off guard, wiped the water from his mouth and slowly stood. "I didn't know," he said, his voice tinged with confusion and frustration. "I'm just a traveler, been on the road too long. I thought it was just water." The chief stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "This river is sacred to my people. Only those who are chosen may bathe in it. The waters will grant their wish, but at a cost." Jake furrowed his brow. "A cost? What kind of cost?" The chief's face remained stern. "It is not for me to explain, but I can tell you this, the river has a way of binding people to what they least expect." Jake was silent for a moment, processing the words. The heat of the day seemed to intensify, the air thick with tension. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, the chief's voice rang out again. "Since you have bathed in these waters," the chief said, "the river has claimed you. You have made a pact with it, and as such you must honor it." The warriors behind the chief stirred, murmuring among themselves, their eyes flickering to the young woman standing beside the chief. She was beautiful, with long, dark hair cascading over her shoulders, and her face, though stern, held a certain grace. She wore a simple yet elegant beaded top and a short skirt made of leather, a proud symbol of her heritage. Jake glanced at her, and for a brief moment their eyes met. The weight of the chief's words hung heavily in the air, but it was the woman's gaze that seemed to linger in his mind. Something about her eyes made him uneasy, yet curious. The chief cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "As part of the pact, you must marry my daughter." Jake blinked in surprise, unable to process the words immediately. "What, marry?" he stammered. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't want any part of this." The chief's eyes narrowed, and his voice grew even more commanding. "You have bathed in the sacred river. You have broken our ancient laws. There is no turning back now. The river chooses, and its will must be obeyed." The words echoed in Jake's mind as he looked back at the woman, the chief's daughter. She stood motionless, her expression unreadable, yet her eyes spoke volumes. He could see no resentment in her gaze, only acceptance. Still, the thought of being bound to this tribe, to this life, seemed impossible to him. "Your wish may have been granted, but it comes at a cost," the chief repeated. "Now you must face the consequences of your actions." Jake's heart raced, his mind spinning with confusion and fear. He didn't know what to do. He didn't belong here, not in this sacred place, not among these people. Yet the weight of the chief's words bore down on him. And he knew that defying the river's will could bring consequences, far worse than marriage. And so Jake stood there, caught between the ancient forces of fate and the life he had always known. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and acceptance. Jake spent his time in the Apache camp, unsure of what to make of his situation. The chief's daughter, named Naya, would often pass by him, her gaze distant and unfeeling. There was a sense of responsibility on her shoulders, one that was passed down through generations, as though the marriage was her duty, not her choice. She had known this moment would come, just as the chief had known. The river had chosen, and the pact had been sealed. Despite the tension between them, Jake couldn't help but feel a strange pull towards Naya. There was something in the way she carried herself, a quiet strength that reminded him of the wild landscapes he had roamed. She was not the damsel in distress that he had expected, but a woman who had been shaped by her culture, her people, and the river's will. Jake's mind, however, was far from peaceful. Every day he wrestled with the reality of his situation. He was a cowboy, a drifter, a man who had never stayed in one place for long. And now, he was bound to a life he didn't want, trapped by a sacred river and a promise made without his consent. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jake found himself standing by the river once more. The cool evening air was a welcome change from the scorching heat of the day, but the weight of the chief's decree hung over him like a storm cloud. He could hear footsteps behind him, and when he turned, he saw Naya standing there, her expression unreadable as usual. She said nothing at first, simply watching him with the calm gaze that always seemed to pierce through his defenses. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "You don't want to be here," she said softly. It wasn't a question, but a statement of truth. Jake nodded, his throat tight with frustration. "I never asked for this. I don't even understand why I'm here, why I'm tied to your people." Naya stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. "The river chose you, Jake Walker. It doesn't make sense to you, and it never will. But you must accept it. There is no escaping what has been set in motion." Jake's chest tightened as he fought back the urge to run, to escape the bonds that had been placed on him. But Naya's presence, her calmness, seemed to ground him in a way he couldn't explain. "I don't know what to do," he confessed, his voice raw with emotion. "I don't know how to live this life." Naya reached out, her hand resting on his arm. "You don't have to do it alone. I will help you, just as the river will help us both. But first you must trust me." Jake looked into her eyes, and for the first time, he saw not the daughter of an Apache chief, but a woman who understood the weight of their shared fate. The path ahead was uncertain, but in that moment, Jake knew that the river's will could not be denied. It had brought him here, and it would shape his future in ways he could never have imagined. And so, with a quiet nod, Jake accepted his fate, ready to face whatever came next.